Welcome to our webinar on menu and price optimization this afternoon. My name is Janet Hall and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Fishbowl. I'm delighted that you could join us to hear Mike Lukianoff, our Chief Analytics Officer, discuss this topic that is particularly timely for 2016 because of all the thinking about the implications of changes in the minimum wage, changes in commodity prices, and so on. You can see Mike's bio on the screen. I just add to his bio that the analytics work he's done with clients has helped them drive profitable decision making while also helping them to mitigate the risks that come with change. And I think you'll find his presentation highly instructive. Feel free to submit questions anytime. Mike will answer them if he can during the presentation. Otherwise, he'll respond at the end. Thank you so much again for joining us. And now I'll turn this over to Mike.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks everybody for attending. Let me, John, could you move to the next screen for me, please? Okay. So I just want to start out and talk a little bit about data and my background. So Janet mentioned a little bit that I got started in really restaurant analytics about 15 years ago, and over time, I think as I've been working in data, I think that the environment has really changed in that there's so much more information that you can put into decision making, and really there's a lot of buzz about big data and so on and so forth. There's a little bit of hype around it, but I think that the potential that big data has in terms of helping to make better decisions is really not overstated. It may even be understated, because really the whole realm of analytics and research is completely changing. And I think that pricing can be really a great way of launching a big data analytics type of a platform, largely because the benefit of pricing work is very measurable, and it also requires some pretty good data discipline as well in order to execute. Speaking just a little bit about the pricing in the context of total menu management, and I think this is an important way to start a conversation anytime we're talking about pricing or menu, is that when I think about how you manage a menu in the restaurant environment, there's really four critical components to it. Really sort of going from bottom to top. Brand relevance, right? If you're managing your menu, you need to make sure that anything that you put on it is relevant to your brand, not just following what the competition was doing. You also need to understand which products have different levels of executional complexity. Meaning, if you have a product on your menu that the kitchen gets it, and you get 10 of them and it bogs down the line, that can really restrict your profit potential. So you need to be very careful about these products. In the context of pricing, you might want to price some of these a little bit higher because you don't want to necessarily have the highest demand for them, particularly during peak periods. The other two are, I think, more what we'll be talking about today, especially the top pillar. So we talk about traffic and understanding each product in each category in this vein. Which products are more responsible in your environment for actually generating guest frequency and guest reach? The selection of the product itself, how you place it on the menu, and also how you price it are really an important factor in making sure that you're maintaining your store level traffic. When we think about pricing, mostly we're thinking of it in terms of sales and profit. So product by product, store by store, how are the different products contributing? And if you increase prices, or for that matter, if you decrease prices through discounting, is it actually enhancing your profit, or is it taking profit away? So thinking briefly about sort of the evolution of restaurant pricing, really if we go back in time, and we think about how restaurants have traditionally priced their menus, it was really mainly a cost factor. So, going back to early days of my career, I was taught that you take the cost of your product, cost of, say, the plate recipe, you multiply it times 3, round to the nearest 0, 5, or 9, and there you have your price. The Swiss were a little bit more sophisticated. They multiplied times 4, but that was about as sophisticated as it got. I think over time, as a lot of markets started to get much more saturated in terms of competition, you started to get a lot more competitive benchmarking, right? So we go out, collect the competitor information, and then you see a lot of brands sort of pegging their product against the competition as closely, or following close behind, or maybe going a little bit higher. The trouble with that is that you end up chasing each other around the tree. So, who's to say, first of all, that the competition was right when they selected the price point? And who's to say that even if it is right for your competition, that it's right for you? And your signature items, your experience, your everything else, can be rather different. So this cost-based and competitor-based pricing really leaves the consumer out of the consideration set when you're determining what your prices should be. So what demand-based pricing is actually measuring how demand changes, both in terms of trips to your restaurant and what they're selecting on your menu, and using that to help set the prices, because then you're actually measuring more how consumers are voting with their dollars as the cost of your experience increases. So if we think about it in terms of demand-based pricing, we can think of it in a number of different ways. From the product level, right, people will change what their behavior is, whether it's a burger or a sandwich or a steak. Product by product, they're going to make a decision when they look at the menu. Then across categories and perhaps in multiples, right? Do they buy maybe in a Mexican chain, for instance, maybe they buy fewer a la carte tacos, or they change that bundle in some way. The market basket, meaning that, are they changing the total bundle? So if you increase the price of a hamburger, maybe people still buy the hamburger, but they're not buying the Coke with it, right? So how are people managing their check? And then finally, store by store. So I think market-based pricing, actually when I started in this, most restaurants were afraid to change from single price across even a national chain, and then it became more market-level pricing. Now we're seeing a lot more chains that are doing differential pricing within market, because really, if you think about the different types of trade areas, whether it's a business district, whether it's residential, whether it's high trade area, the value equation within a market can be rather different from one location to the next. So along those lines, value, I think, first of all, is one of the most misused words in our industry and some in retail. Most people who talk about their value this and their value that are really only saying that, this is the cheapest stuff on the menu. But the truth is the consumer is making a more complex assessment of what value is. So if you think about what this equation is, and I think it looks a little bit theoretical, but having been doing this in terms with predictive modeling for more than a decade, I've seen that this equation actually really does play out, even with chains that say serve the exact same food and beverage and have the same theoretical service and atmosphere. Those who execute on the top line better end up having more pricing power, because the value, even at the same price, the value ends up being higher if you're executing better on the top. So also when we think about menu innovation and so on and so forth, how can you drive pricing by improving the top of the line and giving yourself more pricing power? So I think this is a really important part to consider when you're pricing. When you're going in to change prices, people will often ask me, what do I recommend I change about about what I do. I say, put some more people on the floor, right? If it's full service, or open some more registers, do some more training, because if you can improve that value, that experience, then you're going to improve the value perception even at a higher price. So in restaurants, we have the dubious distinction of having 2 points of price resistance, whereas most industries only have 1. So, for instance, if you walk into a 7-Eleven and you buy a bottle of Coke, it's $1.99 or whatever that bottle is costing today, and that's your point of price resistance. You buy it or you don't. In restaurants, you've got 2 points, right? So first is the menu board, or the menu. So you look at the menu and you make an assessment, product by product, and in your consideration set, and you decide whether there's whether that looks palatable to you, right? So it's the first impression. It sets an expectation with some of those commodity type items, right? You might be right then and there being benchmarked. For your frequent customers, that's where they may notice, that a price went up, right? Maybe coffee went up. Maybe something else that they tend to notice has gone up in price. So that's the first time that they're going to do it. Typically, when people see prices that they don't like in restaurants, especially for more frequent or react negatively to a price change, usually they don't walk out. Usually, they are just adjusting their behavior. The second point of price resistance in restaurants is when they get the check, right? So they look at the check and they make an assessment as to whether the total experience was worth the total price that they're going to pay now, and that's where they tend to be making the decision as to whether they're coming back the next time. So it's really important to manage both sides of this, right? Because if we see a lot more small plate concepts and that kind of thing, which can be great on the first impression because the prices look small, but then you build your own plate and all of a sudden you're spending a lot more than you thought you were going to. That can be very positive in some ways, but if you go across that threshold, you might not get a repeat visit. So it's really important to be able to measure those two dynamics, and particularly the second one, understanding how the total check change affects your customer visitation by restaurant. So I'm going to go over a little bit of menu engineering, and I'm sure many of you have seen this kind of a chart. I think it's been in the industry for quite some time. I add a couple dimensions to it. I'm going to talk about how you can use this, because this is a simple way of making some pricing decisions that that you can do without necessarily any real advanced statistics and so forth. So if you think about the chart here, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, what it's charting is how popular an item is on the left axis, and on the bottom axis, how profitable, right? And in this case, we're not looking at the percentage margin. We're looking at the dollar margin, right? The penny profit, right? How much money do you put in the bank every time somebody buys it? So with that in mind, the upper right-hand quadrant, those are what we would call our star performers, right? Those are the products that when we sell them, they are very profitable, and we sell a lot of them, right? That's what I call the bank deposit, right? You can either use those products to leverage and make more money in a price change, or if you get pushback from that, you could really hurt the business. So you need to be extremely cautious with those products that are in the upper right-hand quadrant. You need to know what the potential ramifications are of increasing or decreasing those prices. If you go to the upper left-hand quadrant, where it says opportunities, those are products where they are below your average penny profit, right? So they're not that profitable when you sell them, but you sell a lot of them, right? The way that the pricing theory goes is if you're going to increase price, instead of going across the board where you're most likely to trigger that second point of price resistance, be very targeted and try and get those items where people are least likely to react negatively, but also pick those products that are below average in profitability. So in this example, if you took a product from the product A and you increase the price, then essentially you're moving it across into the other quadrant, and theoretically, we've just gained that much profit. However, what happens if that's not a lateral move, right? By definition, there's a demand curve on products, and it tells us really that as prices go up, demand will go down. Doesn't happen all the time. Doesn't happen in the same increments every time. It's not always easy to measure, but typically, you will find that most products over time eventually start turning down, right? So what are those increments? Now that might be acceptable, but if there's a huge drop-off, then you may have just hurt the business by trying to increase the price of a less profitable item. Now the question though is, what happens to the demand, right? So if there is a slight drop in the demand for product A as the price goes up, is that moving to more profitable items, or is it moving to less profitable items, right? If it's moving to a less profitable item, then you may have just negated any benefit that you would have otherwise got from the price increase, right? That's why there's a lot of metrics out there that say, if you're going to increase your price, you've got to, you may only get 50% flow through, or 60%, or 30%, right? There's a lot of different metrics out there. The industry average that I was always told is that basically to get 1 point in price, you got to take 2 points, which doesn't sound like a great formula to me in the end, right? How do you keep it all? Well, you keep it all by being very targeted, right, and picking those items that are less price sensitive, or products that have some price sensitivity, but to trade with products that are more profitable, right? That way, you can move fewer items on the menu, potentially encourage some trade up to more profitable items, thus keeping more of the profit that you get from the price increase. So if you think about how a typical a typical menu engineering grid can be enhanced with some additional dimensions, right? Here's just a quick example of how we would look at this and think about the different strategy, right? So in this case, we took the complexity level, right? So how difficult is it to execute, and how price elastic it is, right? So in this case, we've got the same measures: how popular the product is, how profitable it is when you sell it, and then the size of it is telling us how complex, and then the color is telling us how price sensitive it is, right? So in this case, you've got chicken fingers in our example. It's red. It's not particularly complex, but the red tells us that it's highly price sensitive, right? It's up in this quadrant. So most of the likely trades, when you increase this price, are to less profitable items, right? So you want to be extremely cautious with that. And when we get into the fish and shrimp dinner, right, it's highly complex to make. It's highly price sensitive. It's one of the most profitable items. This might actually be one that you would consider rolling back a little bit, right? Sometimes we see that maybe it's just over a psychological barrier, and you can actually get people to trade in and move a product like this further up. Turkey club, it's got a bigger circle, which tells us that it's more complex to execute. It's moderately price sensitive, so you might lose some volume on it. This might be a candidate to increase price, because even if you lose a little bit, maybe you're getting some more, some better throughput in the kitchen. Depends on what it's likely to trade with. We do some pretty sophisticated statistical modeling, but I think that philosophically, right, and structurally, this kind of an approach with some basic point of sale data can be executed, especially if you've got a commitment to doing a post analysis. That can still get you some better flow through on pricing than you might get otherwise. One other thing that I think is really important to understand on the menu, which is a little bit harder to get at, is understanding which products have unique reach. This is where when I was talking about the traffic component. So what reach is is knowing what products are more likely to cannibalize one another and what products are likely to appeal to a unique type of customer, right? So in this example, if you have a hamburger, right, and you're a restaurant, you've got one product, and all you sell is a hamburger, and then you add a mushroom burger, you might extend your reach to a new customer, but it's probably going to be very small, right? You might have 98% overlap, and the additional customer that you gain might only be 2%, right? Now, but then if you add a chopped salad, you may not sell nearly as much of the chopped salad as you do the mushroom burger, but it might be completely unique reach, right? That's why when we think about some of the products, like maybe there's a vegetarian item, maybe there's some of these, oh, we kind of need to have it. So it's on there, right? Sometimes the mistake that I see restaurants make is that they'll lop off that item, and then they'll lose that customer altogether. So now where it comes into play in pricing is making sure that if you know that you've got some unique products that have unique reach, having some better understanding as to, is the reach to a higher income or more price sensitive or less price sensitive consumer, because then product by product you start to understand if you're stacking on more pricing in one segment versus another. So how does this all come together? I'll give you an example of a chain that I won't name, but and actually I think this is a good example because it's very common in terms of the types of situations where clients will come and ask us for some help. So in this case, there was a casual dining restaurant chain. Their costs had significantly increased since their last price increase. They hadn't looked at price really in 18 months, largely because the last time they increased their prices, they had a lot of backlash from consumers. And then because they had the backlash from the consumer, had some downturn in traffic, they went and rolled their prices back. But they didn't get back the customers that they had alienated by the initial price increase. So they were very, say, gun shy about changing the prices at all because they had done a little bit of damage. So they came to us saying, look, we haven't increased our prices. We want to be cautious of it but our cost equation is increasing, and we can't not do anything anymore, so we need some help. But the other caveat was, but we don't really believe that what you do is beyond voodoo. But we're willing to do a test, right? We want to see our pricing versus your pricing before we roll anything out, and we want to see if it's successful. So really we broke up and this chain, by the way, had one single pricing tier, so all of their stores were priced at the same pricing point. So the solution was we worked with them on an econometric pricing analysis where we took the point of sale data as well as competitive price assessment and a lot of the other peripheral data, understanding what their marketing calendar looked like over time. We took 2.5 years of data history. We ran some models to try and understand, what products were more price sensitive, which ones were less, how purchase bundles, would change by store, and then in the second phase, we wanted to take a look at what the opportunity would be for differential pricing by store. So measuring the price sensitivity by store. Also looking at the trade area variables in terms of, what's the competitive saturation like, what kind of income levels do you have, what sort of commerce happens in the trade area, and so that way we could come up with a solution that could be very surgical in terms of selecting the right products to price for the right stores, and in fact introducing some variable pricing even within markets. So we didn't create enormous complexity, we created only 3 tiers. So we went from 1 tier to 3 tiers. So really the solution details was really understanding the price elasticity, understanding the trading relationships between products, and also understanding the complements, right? So as prices go up, do people start to manage to check down, and which products do they do that, on and with? Purchase profile analysis, which is really the, making sure that you're comparing like tickets, right? So for instance, somebody who comes in and in the morning and gets coffee only, right? How much of your transactions does that represent? And if you start to lose traffic, what kinds of purchases are you losing, rather than just this sweeping, we're down X% in traffic? My question would be, well, what kind of customers, what kinds of occasions, what types of purchases? If you don't know that, then you don't really know how to create a solution. So we identified what the potential risk factors were, identified what the stores, and then we set up a test and control, right? So we created 3 test pods. So we did one of the test pods was the client was going to execute their own pricing the way that they had traditionally done it. The second pod was our selection of stores where we would target the exact same price increase on the top line that they were targeting. And then the third one within their current tier system. And then the third pod was we would introduce differential pricing to particular stores. And then we analyzed that by purchase cycle, right, versus the control. By purchase cycle is really important because oftentimes people, in the first purchase, depending on what your average, you're going to have different purchase cycles. So if your average customer is visiting once a week, then that means you're through 3 purchase cycles in 3 weeks, right? If your average customer is coming in once a month, then it takes you 3 months to get through a purchase cycle. So the dynamics that occur in different purchase cycles are really important. So as you're analyzing a post-implementation, you need to understand each purchase cycle. In the first purchase cycle, you're more likely to have people managing their checks, so you'll see a lot of, if there's a bad reaction, you may see a lot of shift in what people are purchasing. By the second purchase cycle, that's when you're going to start to see some transaction shift because people have decided not to come back. By the third purchase cycle, you may get those people back because they may have gone next door or gone somewhere else. Oh, well, the whole world is more expensive, and then they go back to their favorite restaurant, right? So really, it typically takes about 3 purchase cycles to understand really what the steady state dynamic is following. Really important as you decide how you're going to implement, because oftentimes post-implementation analysis is done on too short a window to really understand what the steady state impact is going to be. So the result of our test was that the test groups outperformed the company in both test pods in all measures. So in terms of profit flow through, our method achieved double the profit flow through of the client prices. The Fishbowl group also showed no transaction loss compared to the clients, which showed 0.75% of transactions lost. The profit improvement in the first year was about $6 million on $300 million in revenue. And as a result of this, we became not just a pricing partner, but also their analytical partner over years now. And their attribution in terms of what the change in their methodologies did for them was about 6.5% of their sales flowing straight through to profit over 2.5 years. So almost $20 million in profit increases by introducing a more rigorous and disciplined approach to pricing. So just to summarize, what I would say is that you don't necessarily need econometrics and demand curves and so forth in order to get more sophisticated about pricing. You can, I think that within a framework where you take some of the traditional menu engineering approaches and you start to look at how different products have reacted pre and post in terms of their mix, that could help you to put together a more strategic, a more surgical plan. Also, don't be too afraid to price differently in locations. And I don't mean huge differences across locations, but if you can, in a measured way, understand what the trade area differences are from one location to the next, and be very targeted in your pricing. There's a big opportunity in most chains in looking at pricing differently by different trade areas. In fact, I would say that in terms of risk to pricing, you are exposing the bigger risk in most chains is that when you do X% price increase across the board and you subject that to all stores, you are usually subjecting some significant number of stores to prices that they cannot and should not be taking to maximize their value equation. So you need to be very cautious about that. And I think that the risk that you expose a store to that doesn't have pricing power and increasing the price anyway, that's a bigger risk than having differential pricing across two stores. And I would say that you certainly minimize risk, right, depending on the size of the chain. A larger chain, when I started in this, about 15 years ago, really the only, it was the McDonald's of the world and the really large chains that were doing econometric pricing because, it was expensive and they were, the data was difficult to get at and they were the only ones who could really afford it. What I would say is that, data availability, right, the price of this, the access to being able to do more sophisticated analysis is completely different than it was 15 years ago. So it's really more about the data discipline. If you can get discipline around how you collect, store, and manage your data, these kinds of techniques can be applied. We've done it on as small as chains of under 10 stores if they're high volume enough. So this kind of a method, don't think that just because you're a smaller chain, it's not accessible to you. I would say that I would suggest that it is. I would also say one other thing: use competitor prices as guide rails. Don't peg your price against the competitor because you're offering a different experience, right? That's why they make choices about brands. Make sure you know what they are and use it as guide rails, but don't just shadow your competition when you're doing pricing. All right, and thank you all, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Thanks a lot, Mike. That was really a terrific presentation. We have several questions here, so let me just start with the first one for you. If I have rapid introduction of promotional products on an ongoing basis, how do you manage the product mix and the changes that you see in sales and the product sales going up and down?
Yeah, I think that I think first of all, it's a good question, right? Because I think that's always one of the things that's difficult to track. If all you're doing is looking at product mix, it becomes a lot more difficult. The way that we look at it is looking at tickets that contain those new products, right? Because if you're actually tagging the tickets instead of just looking at how your mix shift is changing, then you're able to understand a lot more about the dynamics of those new products, right? From how many of our total tickets is it making up? What does the total purchase look like when those are on the menu? So for that matter, also being able to hold constant other products for so that new product introductions and so on and so forth don't completely throw an analysis out of whack.
So here's the next question. At the beginning of your presentation, we saw a slide with showing a lot of sources of data. How many sources are really necessary to do effective menu pricing analysis?
Yeah, I think the most important source is always the point of sale, right? So how do people, how do people actually vote with their dollars, right? That's the most important, and typically you want to be analyzing at least 2 years worth of data. Reason being, you want to be able to deseasonalize it, right? If you've got some real seasonality in your system, you want 2 years to really understand what kind of trend that is. In addition to those, I think the marketing calendar, so internal data sources, right? You need to have some discipline around making sure that week by week and market by market, you've really tracked what your marketing initiatives were, what products were, when product launches were, and so on and so forth, so that you can analyze what the trends are when they start to kick in. In terms of external data, we use a lot of demographic data, not necessarily the psychographic data. We do use that too, but I would say that a lot of the demographic data, just knowing some of the standard things about how many competitors per population base and that kind of thing surrounding the stores, that's hugely beneficial. One thing that I would say that's been interesting is that there are a lot of new data sources that are starting to become available. So more and more, when we do a pricing analysis, we're looking at, say, consumer sentiment, right? And whether that's coming from a structured source where you subscribe to the consumer sentiment, like an SMG or what have you, or if we're going straight to social media to see store by store what sort of sentiment ratings each store have. Those are really important, again, in understanding what the total value equation is, because the total assessment of the experience is going to be a really important part in understanding what sort of pricing power you have.
And we have time for one more question, and we have one here, kind of a follow-on there. Is there any application for predictive modeling or for predictive analytics based on the various types of data inputs, such as guest visits, pricing, item categories, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I do day in and day out, right? So this is, when we build the models, and really the goal is to understand, when you introduce something, whether it's a promotion, whether it's a radio campaign, whether it's changing prices or a new product, how do you align all these data sets so that you can make an accurate prediction as to what sort of profit flow through you're going to have, how's it going to affect transactions, how's it going to flow through to to total profit. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's really exciting about where the world is right now with all of these new data sets that are accessible and the sort of processing power that's now available to be able to process the data, is that predictive analytics is really entering a new era that's going to be really the backbone of decision making, I think, for the next for the foreseeable future.
Great. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time with us this afternoon. I'd like to thank the audience for joining in, and we hope to see you soon on our next webinar. Thanks a lot.